Okay, this December 18th, 2019 meeting of the Oyster River Cooperative School Board will come to order. The first order of business is the approval of the agenda. I'd like to make two changes just to accommodate people who are here. I'd like Andy's going to give a report on the, I guess, scheduling issues with the gym. And Ron has some videos about the new middle school, and since they're here, I wonder if we could have Andy first and then Ron second after the approval of the minutes. Is that agreeable to people? Mm-hmm. Okay. So with that change, could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Yeah.
Denise?
I'll motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Moved by Denise, second by Brian. All in favor?
Tom, did you want to talk about the policy too, or just hear what Andy had to say and then do the policy later?
Policy comes up later. So.
He's going to.
Okay, so just hear from Andy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He has to go somewhere. So.
Sure. No problem.
Okay. So public comment? None? Okay. Approval of the minutes? I have one small change. It's on page 3. It's middle of the page. It says, Tom Newkirk stated that for the middle school, even looking at the margin of error, it should be still below 700 students, the projected capacity of the new middle school. Are there other changes? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the minutes with that change? Denise?
I motion to approve the minutes, the regular meeting minutes.
Moved by Denise, second by Brian. All in favor? 6 in favor. You're abstaining?
Yes.
Okay. 1 abstention. Michael's abstaining. So move to Andy, if you want to fill us in. Thank you for being here.
I don't know if I have a major report to give here, but I want to let the board know that myself and a few others have been meeting with the organizations. There has been some conflicts with the allocation of spaces, and that we have met with one organization and have heard their concerns, and they're in the process of trying to work through those and try to accommodate everyone as best we can. Mm-hmm. So I guess if you guys had any questions, I was happy to be here to answer any.
Denise?
So my understanding is that the biggest issue was just in terms of meeting sort of a deadline in order to set the winter schedule. Am I correct in understanding that? And it was just a difference of, one group not necessarily submitting their
it was
requests.
not necessarily submitted at the same time. One group was waiting to be awarded that time, and we still hadn't received the other group's registration. So that said, we are still trying to work with the other group and trying to meet their needs as best we can as well.
Was this a new, kind of a new procedure where everything had to come in at the beginning of the season, or has that always been?
No, so what? Right, yeah, this is kind of going off of the new policy that you guys have.
So if I could just add to
yeah.
that. So it actually kind of feeds into a conversation Dan and I were having just a few minutes ago. The board has been talking about the facilities use policy now for quite a lengthy time. And so essentially what we've been doing is operating under the proposed policy because it's so different than the current policy. And so Andy reached out and asked both groups to submit their data, and one group submitted it in a timely fashion and the other group was over 3 weeks later, which caused Andy to turn to me and say, what do I do? And I said, schedule the other group. I mean, it's not fair that we're hanging up one organization over another. So we have been using the new policy, examples being we haven't been charging anyone this year, which is what the new policy would call for. The old policy we would have been charging, and asking the groups to submit their data so that Andy can make a a balanced approach to scheduling also wasn't in the old policy, but is in the new policy. So what I was saying to Dan is, right now administration is between a rock and a hard place because we know what the board wants, but it hasn't been adopted yet. And at the same time, if we use the old policy, we'll end up turning everything on its head in the middle of a year. So, we've been using best judgment based on the fact that the board is has been in two different places historically and now a new place, hopefully tonight when we get to that policy. So Andy has been trying to be proactive as the new policy has outlined, asked for the data, didn't get the data, turned to me and I said, make a decision because we can't hold up one group because the other group can't get the data in.
And just to add to that, the only reason that we really came to a place where we had to ask for data is because there were conflicting time slots. Everything else had worked out really well in that two groups were not vying for the same times. Jim Rozicki and I had met with both groups in the fall to schedule. That worked out great. There was no conflicts. We met again for winter scheduling, and we were able to schedule both groups, pretty much without conflict, except for 2 evenings where they were both, asking for the same time and space. And that's when we asked that they provide us with their registrations to show in-district students how many kids there were. So that's where we went, and that's kind of how we proceeded.
Kenny?
And I think you maybe answered it or partially answered it. The data that you were waiting for, what was the data that you would ask?
Residency of the kids that were participating in the programs. So that we wanted to make sure that we were serving the groups with the most in-district students.
Yeah.
And it turned out that they're both 100% in-district.
And so we're using, so I think some of the communication we've seen from community members is talking about a program that might have more enrollment should get preference over a program that, even though they're all in district, doesn't have as many kids. Is that a priority?
Well, yeah, but the problem was that we didn't have that information at the time that we needed to make a decision.
So Kenny, when we get to the policy, that is spelled out very clearly.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and I was just wondering.
Yep.
Okay. So basically, there's the conflict is on two evenings, right? That was
Yes.
the entire conflict?
And we are still trying to work,
Okay.
trying to find some solutions to, whether it's different days or what have you, to work with, both groups.
Great.
We can't make, in a perfect world, everybody would get what they want, but it's just,
Okay.
it's pretty difficult for that to happen.
Great.
Another question.
Okay, good.
So when hopefully the new middle school is built, would that alleviate some of the conflict by having that gym that my understanding is going to be the size?
I think it will to some extent, but in the winter is always going to be a challenge. Because I can foresee, our teams, our high school teams practicing at the middle school as well, so that our kids aren't going until 9:30 at night in the in the high school gym. So, and if our programs continue to grow as they are, we had 50 some odd kids come out for boys basketball. That could have been 4 teams. It's there. So, yes, I think it will help to some extent, but there also could be issues with, there could be some conflicts with our middle school and high school programs
Right.
as well.
So, Andy, in my experience, recreational programs like this often use elementary gymnasiums as well. Do either group use the elementary schools?
They do. They use Massway and Moherament, yeah.
Okay.
Overall, is the utilization of the gym space across the district higher this year than it has in the past?
We have there's another group that has, requested gym space. for basketball that hadn't in the past. So yeah, there is more, it's full.
Oh, and fundamentally, I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah, I
a good
think
thing. It's-
there's a
it's
lot of,
community resource
it's
and
great,
being used.
it's a good problem to have,
Yeah.
for sure, but it does create some conflict.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for your work.
Thank you, Andy.
Me too.
Ron?
Ron?
Every time, right?
Yeah.
We go. Okay. You taught me well. So we just have a couple of fly-throughs of the new middle school, and this is obviously an overhead view coming in across Denison. The idea is that the roof would have the solar panels on it. When we're coming down now, this is the path that the students would take. The parents would be coming in. This is the drop-off loop for the parents. Obviously dropping the students off on the right side of the car, passenger side. And as they come into the school from this direction, you have the gym there on the left. You can see in the front of the building, the one-story piece, how the administration and the faculty really have their eyes on the entire campus. And then as we come across the front, the motifs at the top represent the elementary schools. And then we come into the front door. So that is the, that's coming in, again, from on top.
Was there any vertical exaggeration in that
No,
perspective?
no,
Okay,
this is all built in the 3D model. This is now coming up Co Drive.
Look at the size of that retaining.
And there's the side of the music hall, sort of representing those musical notes, and some color. And as you come up on the opposite side of the street, you can see the bus loop. So that's the view, basically from the neighbors, if you will. Then we're going to cross the street here. And now this is if you're riding your bicycle or you're walking up from Garrison, or you're dropped off in the bus loop, you'd be coming down this direction here. Again, on this side, administration and the faculty have all eyes on the front door, on the fields. And again, the motifs on this side would represent one of the other elementary schools. And then you come in through the front door. So lots of transparency, so all eyes are on those, on that front door. Close this for some reason. Okay. When you come in the front door of the school, the pattern on the tile on the floor is the Oyster River. This is the Learning Commons. It's also the dining hall for the students as you come in. The recital hall is on the right. The gym is on the left behind the display cases. Again, we're representing sort of the water flow on the walls with the acoustic panels and up on the ceiling. And this is you're walking straight through the building. The light wells are above, and you're heading right towards the library.
What is the material of the support columns?
Was that wood?
It'll be wood.
Yep. And so just to the left is also the serving area. And then when we go upstairs and you enter in from one of the stairwells, these are one of the pods for the students. So this is the common area. This common area is the central space that we've been talking about that's wrapped with the 4 classrooms, if you will. And then that looks, you can see how the natural daylighting, so that's the view down into the commons, and then the natural daylighting that's coming into the middle of the building.
There's glass across there?
Yeah, there'll be some amount of glass through there, yep. But, you know, this is the concept design, so we still have some discussions to go along with the faculty. So those are the 4 videos. I'm going to send those off to Dr. Morse so that we can post those on the website and such.
Great.
But, yep.
Can you, and I was looking at the roof, because there was a question on one of the forums about the flat roof, and I thought that I had heard that there was actually going to be sort of a V-like design or something, or somehow.
There is. So the pitch is actually 1/4 inch per foot.
Oh, okay.
So it's not, you know, it's not dramatic.
Okay.
In fact, when you're walking on it, it really doesn't even seem to be pitched.
Okay.
But so the water flows down at 1/4 inch per foot, and then there are drains within the field
Okay.
of the roof.
Okay, cool.
How hard would it be to add voiceover to these? Kind of the way you provided a voiceover tonight as you showed them
Yeah.
for when they're posted online?
We can definitely figure that out, and we can do that.
Yeah.
And then I can send them to you. That's a great idea. I wonder if we should get a student to do it.
Be cool.
Oh, that's even a better idea.
Or is it
Yeah, that
too
would be
too
really
late for
cool.
that? Like, so in other words, we can give you the file, if you will, and see if there's a way to do that. Just because, you know, people don't want to hear my voice.
I think the students would be awesome.
But it adds a lot too. There are details that you would miss just watching
Yep.
video without having that
Yeah.
inside of the voiceover.
Well, one of the details is, you know, the fact about all the sustainability and the ability of the building to really sustain itself energy-wise over time.
And you pointed out the other night the lockers and how instead of these hallways lined with lockers, they're in kind of their workspaces and they're incorporated.
Yep. So the low lockers, we talked about, you know, the issues that have been taking place with sort of higher lockers when you have one locker over the other. So we do have some of those for overflow, but the majority are all underneath the worktop, so that we're making use of that.
What's the transition between the grass and the turf like? Is there an elevation difference there? Is there a clear clean edge? Is it going to be a concrete?
Yeah, so there's no elevation difference, but you will tell. Like that natural grass will come right up against it. We can talk to the civil engineer, and when we get the landscape architect on board, sometimes I've seen, so we don't want to use any kind of gravel or anything that's going to get sucked up into the lawnmower, but we could figure out a way, like right now what you see on the screen is a white line.
Right.
So, you know, maybe that white line becomes just a little bit wider.
Well, that was part of what I was wondering is that right now the way it's shown on the screen, the edge of the field is an immediate transition surface, which is probably not the way we want it.
Right.
You want to be able to go out of bounds without changing traction.
Yep. So that's a good point. So we will definitely talk to the designers about that.
Do you have plans to have more of these where you might go into the entry area, then go to the right into the recital hall, and left into the gym to see what that, you know, that
We didn't, but that's a good idea. I mean, maybe we can do
I know these are
something.
not easy to do, so, but
They're just time consuming, it's just
Yeah.
time,
just time, yeah.
just time and
But
money. But we can, you know, we can definitely take a look at that and see if it's possible to just kind of go through that recital hall door.
If you go left, you go into the, you know, so the concept that you have these really kind of public spaces,
Right.
you know, on that ground floor.
Yep.
Okay.
I think these are awesome.
These are great.
I think that will really get the community excited to see this kind of
That's terrific way to show it off.
presentation, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Have a good holiday.
You too. Announcements, accommodations, and comments from the district. Are there any? No? From the board? Michael?
I have learned a lot over the last 2.5 years as part of this group. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great people, both within the district staff and the community and students, and been impressed with the passion and the investment that we have around the community. I've tried to bring a little bit different analytical, structured perspective to this role, and I would like to continue that work over the next several years. So I'd just like to let folks know that I'm intending to stand for re-election come March.
Okay. Denise?
And I, as well, am up for reelection, and I also plan to run again.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that Shauna Coppola, who's a parent in the district and also a literacy specialist, has a new book coming out, Writing Redefined. And I thought I might just to consider the number of nationally and internationally known literacy experts that reside within like a 2-mile radius of where we're sitting right now. With, Kathy Collins, Beth Olshansky, Mike Anderson, of course, Linda Reef. The disproportionate influence of this small community on literacy in this country and beyond is pretty amazing. And I think it's been this way for a long time, and with a new generation coming up. So I just thought it's worthy of acknowledging that. Kenny?
Before what I was going to raise, and we have to add the name of Tom Newkirk to that impressive list, a star in the field. I just raising this because I've heard from the people who are in charge of kind of running elections in Durham. They're very concerned about primary day, and there's an expectation that turnout is going to be incredibly large, and it's scheduled as a school day right now, I believe. At least that was what they thought. So
we had mentioned that we were recommending that the primary day be a staff day only.
okay, so that I'll give that feedback, not to worry. Great, thank you.
Comment? Assistant Superintendent report?
And that was perfect timing, because that's actually was one of the items that I wanted to discuss with you. Obviously, February 11th is primary day. It was just last month that it was officially designated. You had a discussion back in, I think it was October, where we as a group decided that we did not want to have school once it was finalized, and whatever day that was, we were not going to have school. So we are moving forward with the plan to not have school on February 11th. I did want to just tell you that kind of combining this with the topic of snow days, just beginning to think ahead to the calendar and managing the calendar. It would make sense to when we have no school on the 11th, to simply take the May teacher workshop day and put it on that date, so we don't lose an instructional day in the end. So it keeps us on track with where we are instructionally. So that's what I would recommend that we do moving forward. And if you're okay with that, I would put out communication to that effect tomorrow to the community, so everybody would know that.
And
So
that
that
would take an action of the board because it changes the calendar.
We haven't approved the calendar, though, have we?
Well, this is this year's calendar.
This is this year's calendar.
Well, next year's
Oh, that's,
calendar.
okay, got it. I'm
Alright,
sorry.
so-
Yeah. Denise?
So I'll go ahead and make a motion to have February 11th a staff day and
No
have a
student.
regular school day in May,
Right.
whatever that date was.
Moved by
It's May
Denise.
24th.
Is there
May
sec-
20th.
Second on that? Second by Brian? We all okay with that?
Will Lee also be using Mastway for the primary, or? is that-
Yes.
Yes. That's a relatively new development, and we're glad to help the town of Lee like we do the town of Durham.
And just real quick, I asked Wendy to stick in your folders there's some data that Chris Regan had put together on voter turnouts in Durham in particular. Primary day is typically a very heavy turnout. Last election, I think it was 5,900 people. The thing that is particularly noteworthy is the number of same-day registrants that's come and want to sign up. There's thousands, and there's the line just to do same-day registration is pretty significant. And Lee has been doing their primaries at the safety complex, but really feel they can't manage it there, and so they would be using Mastway as well. And their numbers won't be quite as high as Durham's, but it will be many thousands.
Can I throw one thing out there, just kind of an advertisement? So people may not realize it, but elections really run by volunteers, and when you look at that number of same-day registrations, I worked both the 2016 presidential and the 2018 midterm, and I was registering up to 4 people at a time, and so if people have time in their hands and want to learn how an election works, we could really use the help. It takes a little bit of training, but it's a really awesome thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's another plug why I think it'd be, just as far as being citizens, for us to really try to enact something that the towns participate, that we register eligible seniors sooner rather than later. And they don't have to do same-day registration. I think it involves them in the civil process. It makes Al's work easier, and I think it's a great experience for kids to start to vote when they're eligible, and I think it'd be a great thing to do.
Yeah.
So did you want to vote on that, or?
So,
Oh,
yeah.
I got distracted. All right. No, why not? So we ready to vote on that? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 7 in favor. That change is made.
Great, so I will put that out tomorrow. The second thing I just wanted to quickly mention, when we did the world language presentation on November 20th, there were a series of questions you asked us to provide more information from. It was in your folder at the last meeting, but the last meeting was mostly a budget workshop, so you should have in your folder data on world language enrollments. I included grades 6 through 12, so you can see how many kids at every grade level by language are involved in language, and it's pretty clear Spanish is the language. It's 60-65% of the kids are in Spanish. Second thing that I provided you was the request for sample schedules of the middle school, and so I gave you a sample of a 5th grade, a 6th grade, a 7th grade, and 8th grade schedule. If we were to incorporate language at the 5th grade, the 5th grade schedule would mirror the 6th grade schedule that's there, so we would change the structure to do that. And then the third thing that was asked was take a look at the comparables and see how many calendar days that they had. And for the most part, most schools are doing 180 calendar days and having a longer school day.
It's not in here, actually.
No, I didn't get it
It
either.
was in our
last time?
last meeting,
Yeah.
so
So
it
can
was
you-
in our folder the last meeting.
So, not to get picky, but this is $135 a ton to get rid of. Can you send it electronically to us, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. That being said, it was in your folder, and you
Yes.
must have removed it. I didn't get a chance to speak to you about it at the time. But thank you, touche.
Yeah.
I will not waste paper.
I yell at the town council too for the same thing.
That's good.
Okay, any
Okay.
additional questions? Great, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Superintendent's report?
So, Tom asked me to give you a report where we were in relation to our work with Dr. Smith at the Research Survey Center at UNH, and we've collected the parent questions, we've collected board questions, and we've collected staff questions, and they are being forwarded to Dr. Smith. We probably have 50 parent questions, a dozen staff questions, and about a dozen board questions. So the survey, the reason of collecting the questions is to collect the questions as people ask them. And then Dr. Smith will translate 12 to 15 of those questions into survey questions that he then can clinically analyze. So you won't see every single question somebody submitted because every single question wasn't written in a way that Dr. Smith will be able to digest the data. So we are sending that information to him. We should have feedback, I hope, in the month of January and be able to put out that survey, I hope, in February, but as you might imagine, Dr. Smith's office is incredibly busy. He tends to be the principal surveyor of the state of New Hampshire related to politics, and we happen to be in a political year. So that survey will cost us between $5,000 and $10,000, and that's assuming that we use our channels of communication, school messenger, and he doesn't have to do phone surveys and other tools at his disposal. And so that's where we are, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
So will we see will we see a draft of the questionnaire?
We can do that. We can insert the survey questions into an agenda, and you guys can review them, and maybe we can prevail upon Dr. Smith to be here to answer questions that evening.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Great. I did a presentation this week to the council. From my perspective, in Durham, the Durham Council was incredibly engaged. They had great questions. They gave me actually more time than I usually get because they were totally cued in on the finance part because that was the focus. And I would say very appreciative of the project. The chair of the council literally said how excited they were for the project and about the project. And I think that's pretty incredible when you get an elected municipal body being excited about a school project. So that went really well. I had a small meeting in a living room that was all what I call super seniors. And their questions were great, and they are very supportive of the project. I think the distinction I would make in relation to the meetings is when I'm doing home meetings or church meetings, and I've got one of those coming up in January, it tends to be a completely different group of people who show, and they're usually seniors. They usually don't have children in the school, though some did and do, and so it's really nice to do people's living rooms. We are planning on going to Riverwood in January, and then the Go Vote crew is planning on going to Riverwood in February. So the difference between me and the Go Vote group, remember, is they can advocate a vote. I can't. I'm just providing information. But the conversations have been rich, and they'll continue to go into January and February. I said to Todd the other day, I don't care if we're out 7 days a week. If we can fill our calendar with, talking about this project, I just want to wake up March 11th thinking, yay, we did it. And I don't want to leave any stone unturned. Got a great suggestion today from a community member about reaching out to alumni, recent alumni of the high school who attend UNH. That's a wonderful idea. Got the idea of reaching out to the music students at UNH who come to actually support our kids in the Ed 500 program. Great idea. I'm taking all ideas and trying to turn them into great ideas. But it's been very rewarding to get out into the community in the way that I'm doing it. And even though it's exhausting, quite physically exhausting, I love it. It's just really, it's an exciting opportunity to talk to people in a whole different way.
Okay.
And we're still doing big meetings. We have community suppers set up and, that kind of thing. Any questions? Then I'm good.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. Business Administrator?
So the first item is the monthly or bi-monthly budget update just for the current year. And everything's looking pretty good compared to last year. We're pretty close to exactly where we were at the same time last year, so no concerns. Questions?
So last year we had a fund balance of 700,000, is that right? Does that mean we're kind of heading towards a similar fund balance, or is that?
It all depends, it's hard to say. It's kind of early, I never know what fuel's going to be like, snow removal, a lot of factors that contribute to that. But in terms of staffing and benefits, that's basically where we get most of our surpluses, and it's looking the same as it was last year, so.
But it does speak to the variability of a budget, because you can, when we're building a budget, we're making predictions based on the past, and there have been years when I've been superintendent where you might as well have blown up the past because the present was that detrimental. So, you do want to build a budget that provides you a little bit of elbow room because you cannot predict the future. Weather is a big one. There have been years where we've exhausted our storm removal funds, and years where electricity in the middle of the year, because those contracts don't come up during budget season, they come up in the middle of budget season, where electrical costs go up unexpectedly or dramatically, and so forth. So every budget is the best guess you can make at the time you're making it, and Sue has done a really great job of building really good budgets that allow us to make it through in case we hit some crisis along the way. So thank you, Sue, for the good work you're doing.
Is there any incremental cost associated with a snow day besides the snow removal?
Incremental costs associated with snow day.
Yeah, are there extra staff hours that we accumulate because we end up extending the school year, or other related costs of operating?
I was going to say the duration of the storm is what we found on the town side. Like, when you had like that storm that we had, the last one, the snowstorm that lasted over 48 hours, because you have to keep the crew going that long, it turns out to be a really expensive storm.
For
I think
us,
it was-
that we don't have, like, our crew, I think, they just come in early and leave early. So they just still, right, Jim? They still get an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
We have that flexibility.
Like our crew was in at 3 o'clock this morning.
Yeah, and they left at 11, so they're agreeable to that, so.
No, I don't necessarily, I mean, off the top of my head, Michael, I can't think of anything outside of unanticipated amount of snow. Because when we get, like, you were here in your first year, we were moving snow from the rooftops.
Yeah, that can be expensive.
That was costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah, that's-
just to give you an example. I mean, that was a situation where everybody needed people on their roofs, and the contractors had everybody, right behind the 8 ball, and that's really an excellent example. No, we didn't budget for snow from the roofs, and it probably cost us $250,000 that year. I mean, it was a pretty extraordinary amount of money.
Quite a bit, but we did get money back on that, too, the following year. FEMA money, but,
Yeah, but not dollar for dollar.
no.
Pretty minuscule amount, actually, as I recall.
And
So I
usually-
guess that would be at
Yeah.
Michael, I can't think of anything beyond, unusual years.
And there's not a cost associated with extending the school year in June by a day, keeping the schools open a day longer?
No, because normally we're swapping a calendar day. We can't add, for example, to the teacher's contract year because we want to. The reason we can is because they didn't work yesterday, for example. So that day will be made up in June. And then I think it was actually the second year you were here, if I'm remembering right, the school year got so late that, we simply requested the day be forgiven. And that year, I think you came up with a number, it cost us 1% to not do work that day. It's true, but at some point, you've got to acknowledge the parents have made commitments. I think we're into the beginning of the 4th week of June, and I think that's why we made the recommendation. So that would be a cost, a loss of services.
Right.
But again, those are really unusual, so.
Yeah, because our contracts with our support staff are daily, so if they don't work that day, they don't get paid, they just work another day, so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can we move to the 2021 budget?
So, we left our workshop with the proposed budget and different options for funding. I think you have all of that in your agenda once again, correct?
Yes.
One of the things we talked about was the adjustment we had to make for the bond and how that impacts the CIP, and you have that information. Any additional questions?
But just before we get there, Sue, if I can.
Sure.
So we had an incredibly rich discussion at the last school board meeting in terms of the various, we didn't actually articulate it this way, but after the fact, and I reflected, the various tools that the school board has at its disposal as we move through some pretty difficult years related to the middle school. And I just wanted to do a quick recap. I mean, you know, we have our capital improvement funds, we have our trust accounts, we have our end-of-the-year balances, we have interest-bearing accounts, we have the possibility of offering a retirement incentive, we have potentially any savings from health insurance if it comes in under the guaranteed maximum rate. And in this particular year, which was super unusual, this has not happened since we've all worked together, the state actually increased adequacy funding, which has benefited largely the towns of Lee and Medbury. So I took the time to take our latest numbers related to the bonding of the middle school, and you can see that we've kind of ditched the 4.5% as our base, which is what I showed you in Mohammed when we met. And we've gone with, we're using the rate of the last large issuance of bonds, which was last summer, which was 2.7%. There was just so you know, there was a special bond that was issued recently, and it came in at 2.4%. So as, you know, Brian has alluded to many times, the federal bank reducing interest rates is making municipal and school governance issuers of bonds the best rates that we've seen in really decades. And so when we built this particular memo to you, we used 2.7% because we're feeling more confident that that's a reasonable number to use. But even using that, you know, the proposed budget includes the first interest payment of $625, so we've made that hurdle. And when you look at the years 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the bond, the one that that's going to be the hurdle is not the one coming up, but the 21-22 year, where we have to come up with a total of $1.871,550. So $1.8 million, almost $1.9 million. So that would be the year that I would think that the school the school board would think about offering a comprehensive retirement incentive to try to use some staff savings to bring to bear against that particular year. If we bring in another $625,000 through taxation, that gets us to $1.2 million, $1.25 million. So the real hurdle in 21-22 is the additional interest payment of $625,000. After that, in the third year of the bond, the high school bond is completed. So when we enter the fourth year, we have $750,000 to use against the middle school bond. So that plan will get us to the total payment in year 5 of $2,914,912, and that meets your goal of not having any giant spikes in taxes as we build the capacity to build the middle school. Everything isn't going to, you know, necessarily play our way over the next 5 years, but I thought, you know, based on the conversation we had at the last meeting, it was important to capture that conversation so that as we go through the next 4 budgets after this one, we have this as a reference tool. And so in any given year, we may want to use one tool more than another. We may want to use multiple tools. But ultimately, I think this memo helps you visualize how we get to and how we make a bond payment of nearly $3 million. So just wanted to put that out there.
Well, it seems to me like a lot of things are breaking our way with this, that the adequacy, increase in adequacy fund, the interest rate, and actually the number of tools that we have to deal with not this year's budget, but not the budget we're looking at now, but the next year's budget. And I know at the last meeting, I was concerned about the 3.5%, which, which is the number that we've been using, and uncomfortable at that point with the 4.14. But as I've thought about it, you're not, the actual, because of the increase in adequacy aid, the actual increases are quite, relatively small, certainly for Lee and Madbury. And that it seems to me, and I'll just put this out there, that we're better off with option one, husbanding every tool we have, because we don't need to use them this year, I don't think. And then moving forward, it's the next year's budget that we really have to really work to avoid the spike. So I think that with this budget, there's no spike. It's relatively similar to previous budgets. Next year is the hard one. And I think option one allows us to husband every one of those tools to deal with it. And so I think we'll be able to, so I'm okay. It took me a while to get there, but I think I'm okay with option one. That seems to be the wisest way to move.
I agree with you in the sense that I'd much rather keep my arrows in the quiver until we need them, which is probably going to be next year.
Exactly.
I don't want to use them up now
Right,
when we may need them next year. So, I mean, I would also agree with option one.
yeah.
Denise?
And I agree as well, as I said at the last meeting, it's not a guarantee that the bond passes. And to me, it doesn't make sense to be, doing all of this stuff now because of that uncertainty. I completely agree. I think option one is the way to go. Assuming the bond passes, everything's a go. When we get to our fund balance, we can always choose to return more, more to the taxpayers if if things go well and, we have that money in that account. It's definitely another tool that we have. So I definitely support option one.
So the 4.14% is more than $250,000 over the goal that we agreed to back at the start of the budget process. And that's the number that we've been talking about with the community. And while the increases for Lee and Madbury would be relatively modest, Durham is a majority of our tax-paying constituents. And I think that the Durham town budget also has an impact to the tax rate in Durham this year. So we need to be sensitive to that overall impact to the community as well. So I've taken a little bit more, after I watched the last, I know I wasn't here, but I watched the last meeting. Thank you for recording that, the workshop part of that as well, which we don't always do. And listen to the conversation. The conversation was really focused on if we needed to make adjustments, looking at the trust funds and looking at the capital program. And we hadn't really looked at the operating budget at all. So Al, I'm sorry this is a hard copy, but I just finished this.
No, it's really good. Thank you. I just got it.
Today, so I wasn't able to get it out electronically to anybody. But it is printed on both sides though. So.
I know, it's good.
There was a 2-page roadmap of how we can get back to that 3.5% target. Perhaps it's easiest to look at the summary on the back side. I think that interest revenue from the bond, after going over the cash flow estimate that Sue provided yesterday, I think we can reasonably assume that some of that will be accessible. There are some operating items here in terms of deferring, acquiring one new or leasing one new bus instead of the 3 that were originally budgeted, delaying the start of auditorium curtain replacement program by a year, looking at a more modest increase in some of our furniture replacement and furniture evaluation for the middle school. I think we're over budgeting significantly for our electricity and natural gas. And then there are some adjustments that I would suggest that we make to the CIP as well in terms of continuing to invest in the learning environment. So continuing to invest in laying the groundwork for HVAC upgrades at the elementary schools in the future, adding air conditioning in the high school cafeteria, and then in exchange for being able to do those things, deferring grandstand construction and refurbishing the gym floor here at the high school. So that actually gets us down to a 3.49% increase in the amount to apportion to the towns if we were to do all of that.
But some of this will be deferring things to it, perhaps a more difficult budget year down the road, correct?
Well, so for example, the bus lease, this would have finished up, the bus lease plan was to finish up the bus replacement program a couple years early. Leasing one new bus, adding one new bus to the fleet does mean that we would not be leasing 2 additional new buses right now. That is not actually increasing the budget for the subsequent year, because that lease would have hit us next year anyhow. So deferring does not necessarily mean increasing.
Oh, so actually, this is very similar to what we do on the town side, so thank you for going through this. I also think the same thing, even though, I mean, we started the budget, and it's probably the most word finesse thought ever, but I really did want to stick to what was apportioned to the communities. And so, you know, in the past, I've said over and over again, we can't control the tax rate. It's beyond our control. What we could control is our apportionment rate. And so I think it really is our charge to try to come in at the 3.5%. And when I looked at this, actually, separately from Michael, when I was looking at the beginning to look over, I did agree with the, particularly the air conditioning going into the core academic areas or into the cafeteria when it's really hot, as opposed to the grandstand. It just impacts a lot more kids and it impacts their learning day. So again, looking at this, this is more what I would like to do. I would like to come in at the 3.5%. I think it's doable. I don't think this puts us in a hole for the next year. I think that it really is just beginning to really look at where we're spending our money. So I'm more in favor of this.
Denise?
Okay, again, the issue is the bond hasn't passed. So what I would suggest, because if the bond doesn't pass and we do all these changes, then we're talking at, instead of a 3.5, we're talking at like a 2, well, it was a 2.63 before all these adjustments. So we're going to talk at, say, 2.5, and then we're going to have this huge issue next year of having to try and come back for the bond. And we've done all this stuff, we've delayed all this stuff. So my suggestion is keep it where it is. If the bond passes, which obviously we all hope, we're all, you know, we all want it to pass. If the bond passes, nothing says we have to spend all the money in our budget. If the bond passes, we can take another look at these things and put more money into our fund balance to go back to the taxpayer and kind of do it on that end. My concern is if we do it up front, we make all these adjustments, and the bond doesn't pass, we've backed ourselves into a corner. We really have, because the bond doesn't pass, we've delayed, we've deferred, we've done all this stuff. The taxpayer will be super happy because their increases will be minuscule, but then we'll have backed ourselves into a corner with nowhere to go next year. So that's my suggestion, is that we stick with option 1, go forward, the bond passes, we can always revisit. We don't have to spend every penny in our budget. We can revisit it at that point and say, yep, we you know, we want to put some of this stuff into play so that, you know, we in fact end up reducing that tax impact by putting more money in the fund balance. Is that right, Sue? Am I kind of saying that correctly?
It'll be your next year that goes into fund
Right,
balance,
it would be
yeah.
for next year, but this is next year's budget, which is what we're talking about anyway. But that's my feeling, is that it's just, to me, it's just too much of a gamble, and the bond doesn't pass. And I know some people weren't here for the high school, but it took more than one try. It took more than one try for the track. I mean, we're putting a lot of effort into it. I certainly commend Dr. Morse for all the community outreach. We're doing everything we can, but we just don't know.
So I would say that the impact of these adjustments is really, really small in the big picture. It's not actually 269,000, it's actually half that, because half of that 269 is revenue from interest on the bond. So if the bond doesn't pass, that 135 or 125, whatever amount of interest we're counting on, that's not there either. So you're talking about a very small amount of adjustments here that really would not affect the core academic program in the current year. It wouldn't affect any personnel, and actually would, I think, position us better for the future in terms of
It's
the
essentially
CIP
a
in the future.
swap. The 160,000.
The capital part is
it's a
largely a
swap.
swap, that's true, yeah.
Could I just ask, a question just for my understanding as well. Kind of the way I look at it as well is when we pass a budget, that budget becomes our new floor in a way. And if we pass a budget that has that 4.1 or whatever % increase this year, that becomes our new ground. And so when we go back in the year after that, and we're again going to have an ask, and maybe that ask goes back down to 3.5, but we've already upped kind of the steps. We've moved up. And so we're really looking at a delta over a 2-year period or a 3-year period, which we're trying to capture by looking at budgets out in the future. It's an impact on taxpayers, not only for this year, but it's going to be something they're going to keep paying for each year. And my just concern is, at some point, we're going to get to a point where it's not sustainable anymore. You know, we feel it on the town side. We're just trying to cut everything we can because we feel we're at a max, and I'm scared on the school side. And it's a catastrophe if the bond doesn't pass, but an even bigger catastrophe is if we start not passing our school budgets when we go to the voters, and I worry about that. And I don't know if that's correct, but it's just something I look at it that way.
Can I just ask, the change you propose in the budgeted amount for energy spending, how did you arrive at 11.6 over 2 years versus the 17 proposed?
So where that comes from is our actual spend on gas, electricity, natural gas, electricity, and propane for the fiscal year 19, so the 18-19 school year, was of just shy of $560,000. And what we had budgeted for this year is nearly $640,000. So, and we have this gap because, like Kenny said, we don't budget based on our most recent actuals. We budget based on our current year budget for the next year.
Okay.
So my expectation is that we are significant. I didn't go back and look at what we had actually budgeted for fiscal year 19 for utilities, but my guess is that we significantly underspent the budget that year as well. And so essentially that just becomes fund balance. And I know it's in the details that I didn't go through line by line, but this is not actually a change. This is not a change in how we consume energy. It's not a change in what we do. It's a change in how much we set aside for that purpose. And really, I think the net effect of that is going to be a smaller fund balance by that fraction. So my intent in picking $30,000 to pull out of that, part of it was to get a nice round number at some point, and also, but not to make it punitive. It's still way more than we spent last year.
And not to put you on the spot, Jim, but I'm about to put you on the spot. If we were to add AC to the high school cafeteria, do we have a sense of the resulting impact in energy costs yet?
No.
Straightforward.
We don't know what the weather's going to be like, and that drives.
Sure enough, right, okay, right. But it would be a traditional compressor-based system, high energy consumption?
Absolutely, yes,
Okay,
sir.
yeah.
Denise?
I guess the other concern I have is that I know our administrative team went through and looked at where the priorities were, and I feel like this is just kind of redoing what the priorities are and saying, the bus isn't a priority, but the AC is, and I'm not so sure. I mean, I feel like the administrative team spent a lot of time looking at the budget to decide where the priorities should be.
Thank you, Denise. The administration did do exactly as you suggested, but remember, we're at the board stage now. We're not at the administrative stage, and the board is going to have to approve a budget that they're comfortable with. I think one of the things that Michael just said, I think, is important to reiterate. If we run a tighter budget, then fund balances will go down. We make an obligation to the towns of $400,000 in this proposed budget. If, things don't work our way in terms of the use of energy for air conditioning and whatever, and some of these savings don't materialize, then we're going to impact taxes at the end of the year. If we can't make the 400,000, say it comes in at 250. I mean, we'll run a balanced budget because Sue runs a tight fiscal house, but we might not be able to meet goals that we have committed to in the proposed budget as well. What Michael has done is just a reissuing of priorities from his perspective as a board member. I don't have any strong objection to school board members doing exactly what Michael's doing. I want you to be critical friends as we build the budget, and it's not necessarily that we're in adversarial roles. I do have concerns about the same concerns that I hear from board members. Every time we go into a meeting, if I don't have information early enough, I'm sitting here trying to process in an evening, seeing it for the first time, and not having a chance to talk to Lisa and Jim in relation to, what Michael has put forward as a priority puts me at a disadvantage. The bus fleet, he's absolutely right. We set a 10-year goal. We'll make it in 8 years. Is that a good thing? Yeah, because some of our oldest buses, we want to get off the road sooner because remember when we built the 10-year plan, the bus fleet was a disaster. And so, so you make that adjustment. I have concerns about that particular one. I do have concerns if we're going to invest in air conditioning that we, play around with the energy lines. Other stuff are really about the board deciding whether this is a priority or that it's a priority. The only reason the gym took priority over air conditioning, quite frankly, was because it's been out there for so long. We had decided to, sorry about that. We had decided to try to bite the bullet in this particular budget. To me, that's not the end of the world. I actually kind of like the philosophy that Michael's using in terms of, what has the greatest impact for students. The interest from the revenue, I think that's a decent number. Michael had reached out and asked Sue and I what we thought it would be. We were using 1%, but the market is just slightly higher than that right now, slightly, but it is. And I think Michael's reflected that. I mean, I thought he's put a lot of good thought into it. The gym paint, the reason that that's in there is because the current gym floor is really a disaster, and I'd invite any of the board members to walk the gym floor. Unfortunately, the previous vendor who put down the gym floor did not do it properly, and this shouldn't even be on our budget list for another 3 to 4 years, but unfortunately, the condition is really unsightly, and it's not a structural defect like it's dangerous for our kids. It's just ugly. It's blistering, and it's just not appropriate, appropriate representation to our taxpayers and our community that our high school gymnasium floor looks like that. So, it's really about the 7 of you at this point, other than the buses and, the utility cost that he's presented. I don't have any strong objection to anything that Michael's put forward. I'm going to defer to you guys. Absolutely, Jim and Sue and I sat through and tried to prioritize that for you. It would be insane for us to think that everything we present comes through crystal clear and pure. I mean, we expect the board is going to make decisions different necessarily, and I don't see substance that I find offensive as an administrator. I would like to be able to engage, Jim and Lisa in the conversation, which I haven't been able to because I just saw it. Does that make sense?
All right, so I guess the one thing that I could go for, that now that I think about it, is to include the interest revenue from the bond, because if the bond doesn't pass, then it's not there, so it doesn't, it's kind of neutral. And by doing that, we had, I think that was that option 2? Yeah. So that, if we do that, that's actually option 2. And I could live with that. I'm not comfortable reshifting the priorities, again, as Dr. Morse said, you know, not knowing the bus and deferring and all these different things. So I could go with essentially what is option 2, which is a 3.89% increase. And that uses the $135,000 interest revenue from the bond. I could go ahead and go with that, but I really am not comfortable with any of the other changes, particularly, as Dr. Morse just said, the bus lease. It sounds like, you know, the gym floor really needs to be done. So I guess that's how I would feel, is maybe, you know, maybe we can go with the option 2 and then include that interest. If the bond passes, we'll include it to help lower the tax impact. If the bond doesn't pass, it doesn't matter. It's not there, but it doesn't do anything to increase our budget.
And just before we finish this conversation, the auditorium curtain is a disaster. It's nasty.
So on that one specifically, maybe I missed that, but when we went through the budget as a larger group, the things that were being highlighted as increases for the next year were things that were $5,000 for additional library subscriptions and, you know, fairly small dollar items. It sounds like that's a $40,000 multi-year commitment that we're trying to make, and I do feel a little bit like that one was swept under the rug.
No sweeping under the rug, Michael, just the presentation didn't include it. I don't sweep anything under the rug. I'm very honest and very straightfortard. I
don't
find
think you
that
should
kind
imply-
of offensive, the
don't-
way you
don't-
present
don't-
that.
Don't imply intent there, please.
Can I have I just have just a simple thing. I think the obvious thing is to take this, you guys go look at this, check the viability of it, bring it back to us, and then, what is it, November, January, whatever the next meeting is, you can report like the viability is, the energy of that, and then we can make a decision based on that. But I think trying to make a decision either saying, well, I only want to do option 2 because of this without really thoroughly vetting all this, I don't think is a good idea. I think we should thoroughly vet this. I think there is some room to come down from option 2, and I think we should thoroughly investigate it before we approve a budget. So that's my take.
Brian?
The problem is, most of this are what-ifs. I mean, so we cut the budget on the chairs in the high school cafeteria, would replace only half of them? I mean, that's I don't understand what that amount will give us, how it's saving $30,000. The utility, you know, that you have actual budgeted and proposed, these are what-ifs. If you put air conditioning in, that obviously blows this little thing out of the water. And your guaranteed maximum rate increased by $100,000. I mean, again, you're saying because we were short on previous years that we're pretty much guaranteed we're going to be short again, we're going to have extra money again this year. Those are all what-ifs. I don't like what-ifs.
I didn't include anything from the GMR in this one.
Okay,
I highlighted it as another option, but it's a 0 in the table.
Okay, but I don't want to be doing a budget this large based upon what-ifs. And the utility one is definitely, I don't think makes any sense to me. And if we're going to do the chairs, might as well do the chairs. I don't think we have to cut that down and do half the chairs, because all we're doing, again, is kicking the can down the road on our capital improvement budget. That's all we're doing. We're starting to take our arrows out of the quiver for this year, when we need them, we're going to need them next year. We start doing it now, it's going to be much more difficult next year. And it's not, you know, I understand the percentage, but ultimately it comes down to what the taxpayers are paying. We have money coming back from the state that is going to offset a lot of those funds when it comes down to the state. For a little bit on the higher side, I'm fine with that as long as the tax rate stays within reason, which it looks like it is. So I'm not in favor of option 2 or this.
So I think the decision before us is, do we want to defer to making a final decision till the next meeting, which we can still do. I was hoping we could make it tonight. But if people want to vet these changes, I would think that this, just to have this presented to us and to try to process this in a meeting is unwise. We need to, And if these things are just deferring things down to future years, is that something we really want to do? Or are these, true savings? So I'm wondering, I think we either proceed to choose an option tonight, or if we're going to look at this list, I think it's imprudent to just do it, in 30 minutes, without kind of going to the people who, if you're talking about bus leases, having Lisa Hoppe, kind of weigh in on it. I don't think we should do that without these people being involved. So I don't know what the feeling of the board is, Should we? Okay?
So I agree with Alan, I agree with Dr. Morse said earlier, just as we've made clear, we don't like to be presented with things at last minute and make decisions. I think it would be foolish for us to make a decision. I think Michael's put a lot of thought and energy into it, and I think it really behooves us to really look at it carefully. Certainly Dr. Morse and Sue put a lot of effort into what they presented to us. Tonight's really the first time, though, that we actually get to discuss it. And I think we do have a deadline, because I think early January, we can't keep punting. I think that first meeting in January, we really need to make a decision. So I would very much appreciate, maybe Dr. Morse, for you to communicate with the different leaders, kind of get feedback on some of the things that Michael presented, and maybe send that out to us, because the sooner we have that information. I also appreciate Denise, who made a comment about where she thought she would be, and then said that she would be open to considering something different. And I think wherever we go, I think another thing to consider is just with the priorities, and and where Michael kind of added kind of the what are looked like as student spaces, the HVAC at the elementaries, the air conditioning, as opposed to grandstands. So that all fits into the scheme. It's choosing one option or another. I think that's something we should be prepared to discuss as well, making that substitution.
And I just point out, that's not unusual. We actually did this very thing Monday, where we, counselors went through the budget and began to look at how we actually prioritize. It's not a matter of not respecting somebody's work, it's just an opinion of something, and so it's a natural progress.
That's an alternative.
And it's an important function of a board, really, is to be able to offer a perspective that might be different from an administration.
So that,
Independent of these specific options, obviously a driver for what I was trying to do here was get us to the budget goal.
Yeah.
So another way to approach this is that we could ask the administration to provide an option which achieves that 3.5%, if you don't want to look at it from these specific items perspective.
And not using $150,000 from funds.
I think that's pretty much, nobody's supported that.
Right.
I think we're down to like option one or option two plus, option one, option two, or option two, which this has an element of option two.
Yeah.
Plus the additional.
Yeah, this takes option 3, but it doesn't take $150,000 out of funds.
Yeah.
It's trying to work within the budget to come up with essentially the extra $135,000.
It's option 2 minus $135,000.
Yeah, I got it.
Or something.
So the question would be the viability. I mean, I would think that if people would say that it's inadvisable to wait a year to do the floor, then I'd like to hear that, that this defers, this will, you'll have to do it a year down the road, and that's going to maybe be in a tougher, but I'd like just to get your sense of, how these are.
Yeah, the floor also is that's the size of item that if we wanted to do that within a fund balance, if we were to have a $700,000 fund balance again this year, that's the sort of thing that you can pick up through that without having to.
Yeah.
Right.
It's an opportunity situation rather than
Yeah.
Which we've done in the past.
So does that give a sense for what?
It does, but I want to be upfront with the board that if we have any fund balance this year, I know that we have done capital projects, but looking at the size of the mountain we have to climb in 21, 22, I would be making the strongest possible recommendation this year that we increase the trust funds. I wouldn't be saying, let's go do a floor, or let's go do the stands, or let's go do anything this year. I have to look at the next 3 years, not just this one. And so I'm going to make every recommendation possible for us to be in the best position we can for 21, 22. So we have done that in the past, absolutely.
The problem I see with that is that whether you do that $27,000 in the budget or whether you take it out of the fund balance, it's the same dollars and the same impact to the taxpayer, and it's whether or not you actually hit your budget goal or not.
I understand.
So I disagree with the way you portrayed that approach to the fund balance.
Thank you.
And my understanding is we have to have it set. We have one more meeting left. This is it. You know, it's like,
To
you
meet
know,
statutory deadlines. we have to be
statutory
done.
deadline. So
Do we want to look at the warrants then and make sure that the structure of those meet the board's approval?
yeah, let's do that.
I will say one thing. Oh,
Okay.
did you want to present first?
No, I just, go ahead. I mean, this has
Okay.
been by Department of Revenue, this has gone to the bond counsel attorney, and it's gone to our own attorney for wording, because remember, a lot of these are prescribed by law, so.
So we need to scrap Article 4. I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to take any money out of any kind of other one of our funds. And I think it just sends totally the wrong message to the voter. You know, talk about giving a wrong message. We're just saying, okay, you know, we want you to approve this bond, but now we're asking for another $100,000. So I think we need to scrap Article 4.
So until you actually make
Vote on
a
the budget,
decision at the
Right.
next meeting, you have to keep that there.
As a placeholder.
As a placeholder.
Okay.
So,
I won't
so
do that, no.
it's unclear, like the 100,000 is from interest, right?
Right.
Oh,
But you have to ask to spend it. Otherwise, it automatically goes to your fund balance. So if you intend to use
No,
it,
that's the, oh, it says investment earnings.
right, that's your bond will be invested into.
Oh, I thought that was taking it out of
No,
one
no,
of our
no.
other
That's-
funds.
that's your
So that,
bond.
you know what, that's like, I think the voters will be totally confused
Put a
by
little
that,
like
too.
blurb underneath that, like an explanation
You can-
of what
yeah.
that
It
is.
says the amount will represent.
It says the amount will represent the interest earned on the bond
Bond.
proceeds.
The very first Article 3 we presented to you had this language embedded in it, and then Sue sent it off for review.
Department of
and
Revenue, and they
Property
said it needs to
Revenue,
come
And they
out.
said
It
we
said
had to
come out.
separate
Oh,
it
okay.
from the Article 3.
I wonder, in terms of Article 4, whether you could have language like up to $150,000, because we don't know how much interest.
True, you could, I assume so.
It would seem to me, Michael, that if you're going to, you know, if we go with your plan, you don't quite know what the interest would be. You don't want to set a firm amount, or would you?
Well, I guess, if we're not making spending that amount of money conditional on the bond passing, do you need this warrant article?
No, so you're saying,
So this is kind of an answer to part of Denise's concern about
Right.
what happens to the revenue if the bond doesn't pass.
This
Well, if we
do-
budget for some of that interest that would have come from the bond in the budget either way, either that money comes from the bond or it comes from the taxpayer, I guess, through
Right.
ordinary property taxes.
so you wouldn't want this if you're not,
If we're including that expense in Fund 10, that's expenditure in Fund 10, we don't need this.
right.
Having said that, the bond counsel was very adamant that we have an article that authorizes interest earned, that we have permission from the voters to use it. And again, I kind of go back to what I said when Denise suggested it. I think we should leave this here until we've made a decision on the pathway for the budget, and then we can go from there.
Okay. If this stays in, do we take that money out of the Fund 10 amount that's in Article 3?
No, we're going
So-
to,
Add it to it.
it
Well,
doesn't
I'm-
add
I'm
to
not
the
following.
taxes, it adds to the revenue.
But the question isn't about whether it adds to the revenue, the question is about whether it adds to the expenditure. Does the expenditure, is this expenditure in Article 3 in addition to expenditure, I'm sorry, is this expenditure in Article 4 in addition to expenditure in Article 3?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So if we roll that into the operating budget, then we should be subtracting that out of what's in Article 3.
Well, I think that the intent here, Michael, was to use the interest that the bond was going to use to help offset the payment that we would be making initially in relation to the bond. So it is an addition to, but it's also a mechanism for us to use that we don't have to turn to the taxpayer to help make that bond payment. We can use the interest the taxpayers already approved to help make the bond payment. That's the intent.
I agree with Tom, making that language up to, and I don't know if it makes sense, but the way that first sentence goes, it goes additional sum of maybe say up to $250,000 from investment earnings, and add to that realized from the interest earned or derived by the bond. So it explains where that money,
That's already in the last sentence, I believe.
more clearly where it comes from.
Yeah, it's right there. So this language is from the Department of Revenue.
Putting it up front.
And it comes back to many conversations we have about warrants and how difficult they are to read because lawyers put them together, and it makes it very difficult for the common man to understand what it is that they are saying yes and no to. And so in the past, going back to Al's suggestion, we have put explanations below warrants to help clarify the legalese.
They would be really helpful, because it's so confusing without the explanation on this particular one, I think. As a general voter who's going to go in there and look at that, what the heck is this?
That's why I wanted to try to move it forward where it's in that initial clause, because I think people stop reading after a while.
I couldn't follow the discussion you had earlier just about whether this had to be a warrant. Okay, so I'm going to come back to it, okay? Now, if Michael, Michael's using $135,000 in this plan, $135,000 to essentially reduce the ask of the bond, of the budget, right? Because you're counting this $150,000, right? $135,000, right? It's revenue, and we're going to use it. We're going to use it. It's going to be part of our budget, right? Okay. So if that's the case, do we not need Article 4?
My understanding is because this bond is going to extend beyond your fiscal year, that the only time that interest gets recognized is when your project is finished and it gets rolled into your general fund. See, so because you're a year ahead of the game, yes. See, that's my understanding is why you have to do this now. If you do nothing, it automatically goes in your fund balance. You have the ability in that, like, say, next year, to come back and say, we want to take some of that interest and put it in a trust fund. You have to get approval for the voters. Or you have the ability, your emergency fund, to put that in there, and you'll know what it is. So my understanding is because this goes beyond the fiscal year, you have to actually ask to do it.
Okay.
Do nothing, it automatically goes in fund balance, it automatically offsets taxes, or goes into your emergency fund. And I think you're right, though, Michael, when we talked about that, I think we need, if our intent is to use this as a revenue and offset the budget, we need to take it out of the total because it's going to get added back to the total.
Right, this is a revenue and an expenditure.
Right. And that's one piece that we didn't pick up, but.
So you'd have to reduce the amount of the budget by that because you're adding this 100,000 in.
Yeah.
So we're not actually reducing the budget, we're just moving that part to this article.
Right.
But, well, article, I mean, the 10, fund, whatever it is.
Yeah, you're not, because it really is your budget, but.
Right, the operating budget.
Your operating budget is still going to be plus that amount. It's still going to be what it is on the sheet that I give you, but it's going to be in two different parts here.
Yeah.
See, I guess I wonder whether, the benefit of having this having this warrant almost, it seems like you're asking for a lot of money, then you're asking for $100,000 more. That's the way it's going to appear. And whether, in the long run, this is really a bad strategy.
That's kind of where I'm coming from when I
putting
think
that
about it.
$135,000 is such an important thing that you're going to put this kind of not a poison pill, but something in here that's I think just rhetorically feels difficult to ask.
Yeah, I agree.
So if we don't do this, then there'll be $250,000 or something, or $300,000 that's accumulated interest that would be added to the fund balance in
When the project's finished, yeah.
2022. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Where you want to use the money,
2023
you want to use
fiscal
the
year,
money
yeah.
beforehand, so it would
We
behoove
can't
you
touch
to
it
do
till
the-
then,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
Well, you can come back next year and ask to use it and have a different, and have the warrant next year without the bond
Right.
warrant. So
Which would
it
actually
would
be
be
better.
less confusing because
Right.
people will just be focusing on that.
Right.
And then if they don't
think
vote
that's-
for it, you
yeah.
still get that in your fund balance.
Right.
If you truly want to spend it.
Yeah. And to me, I just think that is a better strategy because I totally agree with Tom that it just looks really bad, you know, to have all that and then say, oh, we want another 100,000. I think strategically, it does make sense to come back the following year with that amount, a separate warrant just for that.
And I think I'm sorry, one thing, in terms of the deliberative session, if you have these three major warrants, that's the cleanest way of having a deliberative session. If you stick this complicated, because, you know, we're trying to sort it out ourselves, to stick this complicated thing in, you know, I just don't think, I'm just wondering if it's worth it. I'm not convinced it's worth it. Dan, go ahead, sir.
Okay, and because it's conditioned on the passage of Article 3, is there not, I'm assuming there's not a way to incorporate it into Article 3?
Well, originally I had it that way, and
That's
that's
how
the
we
way
had it.
bond counsel
And they
recommended.
separated it out?
And DRA said you really need to separate it out.
And did they,
Yeah,
did they say you must separate it?
Yes. Yeah. They're the
Okay.
ones that are the final arbiters
Okay.
of
You
our
know,
warrants.
I don't think they were tried and true on you must. I mean, there was a consultation about it, and when I asked the question with all of the auditors at the DRA, because some people do it this way, some people, but they really want you to do it this way. So
no.
I guess I didn't really get a yes or no.
We had the same conversation last year, and you're in
right.
an impossible situation where
Yeah,
you're not being explicitly told, the law
Right.
requires this, but you're sort of being told, we strongly encourage you to do it this way.
did I give you a copy of what it looked like with it in there? Because to me, that's even more
Yeah,
confusing.
that was the very,
Okay,
that was the
okay.
very first one.
Yeah, either
Okay.
way, I think it confuses the article and confuses the bond issue.
Would a voter who's not really following the whole process and really not being informed about everything, looking at 3 and 5, and so 3 is asking us to raise the money for the new middle school, and 5 is our budget, and the middle school is incorporated into our budget, but the way they're listed, it's not intuitive to someone who is completely
Well, it's
divorced.
not incorporated in our budget unless Article 3 passes by 60%.
Right, but somehow to let, if there's, there are people who don't pay attention, and they come and they say, holy moly, the school board's asking for $50 million for a school, and still they're asking for $48,000 for a budget this year. We're not going to give them all that, and somehow to make it known that 5 does include 3.
5 doesn't include.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't.
include 3, Kenny.
3 raises the interest payment itself. The 625 for the interest payment
Okay.
sits in Article 3. Yeah. I see your point, though, about why am I voting for $50 million and then another $50 million?
Yeah, and just some explanation.
And by the way, if I'm living in Durham, I'm also voting on whether or not the town council gets to issue bonds without going to a vote. So, right?
we
The
do.
charter amendment,
Any
so.
individual item that's less than $1 million, we can bond it without voter approval. That hasn't been changed since, I believe it's 1987. And so what we're considering putting as a warrant to the voters is actually to raise that up to, I think it's about $2.5 million.
I'm just saying it's another,
It's a nice thing to have.
that's another lawyer warrant article.
Okay, so let me think, it seems like where we are is the warrant article 3 is pretty much set, right? Because that's set. Am I correct? Yep. We have the guaranteed maximum. An article the 6 here is set, right? That's the
Right.
right? There's a question of whether we want to have Article 4. If we're going to use the interest, as I understand you, Sue, correct me if I'm wrong, if we're going to use the interest as revenue in our budget, we have to have something like Article 4,
Correct.
okay? And then we have to determine, and we're within I think essentially $250,000 difference on what the amount is going to be in Article 3. Is that correct?
Article 5.
Or Article 5.
Article 5, yeah, I'm sorry. So that's what we have before us. So are we going to have an Article 4? What's the trade-off on that? And what's the budgeted amount that we're going to go for Article 5? And that's what we have to decide that on the next meeting.
Yep.
Or is that clear? Is that right? Okay. And that what we're going to do is we're going to ask the people involved in the various changes that Michael's proposed to determine the viability of those changes. Is that, get some feedback? Is that right? Yeah.
Two very narrow questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Will Article 4, if it stays on, have the italicized text about the school board recommending this appropriation? And will that require 50% or 60% to pass?
I believe it's 60%, but I'd have to check that. It's good.
60? It's
It seems like it would be strange.
just 1 year.
Article 4.
It seems like it would be
Oh,
strange
Article
for the
4
bond to
would.
achieve, say, 63% and Article 4 to get 55%. But if that happened, did Article 4 pass or not?
I don't think so. I think it has to be,
It also
I
has
think
to
it
be.
has to be.
I don't think
It wouldn't impact Article 3, but Article 4 wouldn't.
But it would get the italicized, school board recommends this appropriation.
Yes, it would. It
3/4,
doesn't.
okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question was, I didn't quite understand your response to my question about what the food service, the Fund 21 should be.
Well, I agree with you that that percentage increase was more than it should be, and after we looked at it and thought about it, we didn't change the budget on what happens is we run the numbers, and Doris puts in her guesstimates on what she's going to need, and we talked about it, went back and forth, but we never actually said, let's bring it to what we have on our budget sheet, but we really want to propose that amount.
So this number, the number that's in here right now is
the
last
right-
year's number.
Which is the number that's on your colored sheet, but it's not what was presented in your totals with all the detail. It's a different number, correct? Is that what your question is?
Yes.
Yeah. So we didn't agree with that 11%.
Okay.
Because
But
you questioned-
this is level funding from this year. This
It is,
824
but I believe last year's total expenditures were right around that, or under that.
Okay, okay, so.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to ask, and I'm not trying to debate this one, I'm trying to, so the proposal is for it to be 824. That's not a mistake, that is, okay. So
No,
that's
and the important thing is that revenue matches expense.
Right.
Then the general fund isn't raising anything, but there is still money in the general fund, should they need it, that we've carried for
Right.
many years.
Okay,
We
got
brought it down, actually, we brought it down to 2,000 this year. It's at 28,000 right now.
Okay.
But you're right.
Got it.
Probably next year, we will have to increase that, but it will offset with the revenue.
Got it,
Okay.
okay,
So is it kind of clear what we have for the next meeting then?
thank you.
Okay. We okay with that?
Yep.
Okay. So I think that moves us down to the school calendar.
So Todd, would you take the podium and talk about the changes on the calendar?
Yes, there's a couple of idiosyncrasies in the way this year's calendar comes together. First of all, usually what we have done in that first week back to school is the Monday and Tuesday of that week are teacher workshop days, and then we have 3 instructional days that week. Because that week starts with August 24th, the teacher contract, teachers can't start before August 25th. That's in the contract. So we couldn't start until the 25th. So it's kind of an odd week. We have 2 workshop days because we really felt we needed to have 2 workshop days to be ready for the opening of school. And then there's 2 academic days. Many districts, by the way, are just simply not starting school until the following week for that exact reason. So we're still ahead of the game by starting on the 25th. So the thought was, and this was strongly advocated for by our leadership team, to have the Friday before Labor Day as a no school day, not a teacher workshop day, just a day off. And so that's a slightly unusual thing. We don't typically do that that early in the year, but make the Friday before Labor Day a day off, and then obviously Labor Day, so it gives a 4-day weekend, so the last gasp of summer, if you will. And then the other piece of the calendar that's different than this year is we did put a workshop day on Election Day, which for reasons we've just discussed is critical. And then I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about anything else. Everything else is pretty typical. It's aligned with other school districts. We do take a look at the Dover and Rochester and Somersworth calendars since our kids go to the career tech centers there. Try to make them as close as we can.
And I would say that this is the worst year for that because of the way the calendar is following, that the school systems are all over the map in the region, largely trying to figure out how to put this calendar together. So, in the past, we've been super close, and all the regional school systems are kind of on their own on this one because of the way the year is following.
Denise?
And it looks fine. My only comment is I just feel like the trend seems to be for more snow days. And I know that the 5 is the standard, and I'm not suggesting it for this calendar, but just wondering, should we get to a point where we maybe do 6 built-in days? Because I think the issue is always with parents is they really lock in that last day and they start making their plans to go on vacation and do all these things. And I mean, this year we've already used 3 and it's not even January. So I think it's just something to think of for future years.
Sure. We certainly can do some educating of the community around that and try to push that out. The way the state minimum standard works is when they approve the approval of the calendar, they call for 5.
Yeah.
And that's the standard practice, so that's what everybody's doing. But I agree with you that if we had 7 or 8 snow days, we would probably continue down that road and add a few more days after that.
It's always chains for the buses. No snow days. We could be a leader in the community.
So we're set to approve
So
this.
yeah, so this would be your second view of this, so yes, this would be.
So I'm wondering if we have a motion to approve this calendar?
Can I just ask a
Sure. Go ahead, Dan.
quick question first? So I see the change we made reflecting Indigenous Peoples Day, but we also have Columbus Day. I honestly don't remember if we decided to keep Columbus Day, or is that just sort of a?
It's Durham, it's Indigenous people, and I don't believe Madbury and Lee are Indigenous.
Okay, so that's reflective of the fact that we are a cooperative. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Denise?
I'll make a motion to approve the calendar as presented.
Moved by Denise. Is there a second? Second by Brian. Further discussion on this?
When we looked at this last time, one of the questions I asked was about the 4-day weekend around Indigenous Peoples Day and the effect that I observed in the elementary levels of teachers wanting parents to come for conferences and parents wanting to take advantage of the 4-day weekend and not be at conferences. But it looks like you've decided to keep it the way it is and continue to have that struggle.
Yeah, well, we're trying to stay as close to our other school systems as we possibly can with when their teacher workshop days are. So that was the priority.
Okay. Ready to vote on this? All in favor, raise your hand. You voted?
Oh, I did.
I'm sorry.
I raised it as a quick.
6 in favor, all opposed? Abstaining? 1 abstention? Okay. Motion to approve high school winter coaches and volunteers. Denise?
I'll make the motion to approve the winter coaches and volunteers as presented.
Moved by Denise, second by Brian. Discussion? No, hearing none. All in favor, raise your hand. 7 in favor, those are approved. Policies, we have a number of those. Denise, you want to take us through?
Sure. Okay, so let's start with the policies for first read. A lot of these are new required policies. I have to find my policy list here. Hold on, bear with me for a second. Particularly the oversight, D3 and D4. were new policies that were required. Let me see, where are my notes here? And a lot of the others actually were just policies that haven't been looked at for quite a long time. But D3 and D4 were new policies that I believe it's the state that is requiring. Or they're required by the auditors.
I'm sure the auditors would be very happy if we passed all of these.
Okay,
These are required policies, were generated by the OBM, yeah.
okay.
Yep,
Sorry, they're generated by who?
the Office of Budget Management.
Okay. And the School Boards Association didn't touch them, they're just the same, they are.
The School Board Association deferred to the Office of Budget Management, and so we're using this. They were not particularly motivated. They knew the Office of Management was going to do it.
Did we want to, was DJC one, Jim, that you wanted to find out what was happening at the building levels?
Yes. I haven't.
Okay, so
But I
we
do
should,
want to.
why don't we?
Well, we can do first read, and I'll have that information for you in the next meeting.
So we can have a motion to approve those as a block unless somebody wants to pull individual ones out?
Those three, right?
What?
The three new ones or all of them?
Well, I don't know if anybody wants to pull any. Do you want to talk
Any
about
of
all
the
of them?
first reads?
The first reads we're talking
Just
about.
the first reads, whether we want to approve those as a block or whether people want to pull.
Do them as a block.
I mean, I'll make a motion to approve them as a block, and
Moved by Alice to approve all the policies for first read. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Denise. Ready to vote on this, or first read?
Questions?
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. 7 in favor, those are all approved for first reads. Second reads? Denise? We've seen these a
Yeah, we've
lot.
seen these a lot. So again, I don't know if we can go ahead and approve them as a block, or if people want to pull out any of them for individual discussion.
Does anybody want to pull any of them out?
All right, then I'll go ahead and make a
Okay.
motion to approve policy JLIE, student automobile use, KF and KF, well, we don't really do the R, but it's in here.
I think the only
uses-
one you have to approve is the,
Oh, the
the R1, the
fee schedule.
the fee
KFR1, which is the fee schedule, right. So use of school building and facilities and the fee schedule. JIHB, which is searches of student automobiles on school property. JICJA, which is technology devices. And ADB, which is drug-free workplace, drug-free schools, all for second read and adoption.
Moved by Denise, is there a second? Second by Brian. These have been discussed a lot. Ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. 7 in favor, those policies are all adopted. And thanks to the work of the policy committee, that's been a real labor there. School committee updates, manifest committee met and scrutinized the expenditures. The other committees? Hearing none, okay. Public comment? Dean?
Good to see everybody. Last board meeting of the year. I don't really have much to say, but I'll mention that if you're looking for voters who can vote on March 11th, there'll be a whole bunch of them on February 11th.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dean.
We don't want any voters on March 11th. We want them on March 10th.
March 10th, yeah.
It's a leap year.
So we have the future meetings set up, is specified.
Wasn't the, is the timing correct on the manifest?
What?
For a second? I mean, did
What,
you move that up?
we moved that, when did we move that to?
To what, 2:15, I think it was? Or 2:45?
2:45, okay. Yeah, I think it's posted as 2:45, so. Okay, so we need to move into the non-public session for superintendent's evaluation. So could we have a motion to move into non-public session? Kenny, you're the usual the motion maker for that.
So move to, that we go into non-public, NH State Law RSA 91-A:3, 2, and it would be C, matters if discussed in public.
Moved by Kenny, is there a second? Second by Brian. Roll call on this. Dan?
Dan Klein, yes.
Michael Williams, yes.
Kenny Rotner, yes?
Denise Day, yes.
Tom Newkirk, yes?
Al Holland, yes.
Brian Cisneros, yes.
Okay, great.